the battle of the generations online. Gen Z boomers, Zoomers, and millennials have found a way to poke fun at their baby boomer elders with a phrase that became a viral trend. So what does "okay boomer" really mean, and should older folks find it offensive? I recently spoke to a generational expert, Megan Johnson from Generations Inc., about managing the friction between young and older in the workplace. Megan, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you.
So from your expert position, what is this "okay boomer" trend really about?
Oh, what the trend is really about is the younger generation, millennials and Gen Z, being frustrated with the older generation's dismissive attitude about some pretty serious issues: climate change, politics, the high cost of living. And the younger generation is really concerned that they're getting left with a mess, a mess created by the older generation, and they're getting left with that mess, and they're going to have to clean it up. And the "okay boomer" phrase came from that, the attitude that, hey, you're calling the younger generation, you're calling us the snowflakes, you're saying they have the Peter Pan syndrome. Well, let's look at what you're leaving in our laps, and there's some pretty adult situations.
So let's break that down a little bit. Generally speaking, there's always a generation gap. We think we're going to be cool when we have kids, we have the kids, and there's a gap, right? But there is something different about the current conflict. Usually it's about the past. You don't know what we've been through as a generation. You all are too sensitive to this currently. But right now we're talking about future issues that the current generation believes the baby boomers have caused. Things like climate change, things like debt. So tell me how this makes the conversation unique.
Well, what makes this conversation unique is that the younger generation has a very large platform, social media, that they can discuss these issues. Back when I was that age, whenever I hear my dad say that, I'd roll my eyes. But back when I was that age, I'm a Gen Xer, we didn't have that kind of platform to talk about these issues. And that's one of the wonderful things about the younger generation, is they have the platform of social media, and they are so well connected that they can bring up these issues and discuss them. I think, in some really thoughtful ways. And this whole idea that, well, because they're young, they don't know what they're talking about, I think that's putting our heads in the sand. The younger generation is concerned about some things that are very important, like climate change, student debt. And these are important issues to the younger generation. And the fact that they have social media to express themselves, it really makes it, we need to take it seriously.
And so, both sides, if we're, putting them in two sides, do have a valid point, right? So if you were moderating a conversation between baby boomers and millennials and Gen X, what would you say to both in terms of you're right in this way, but you should understand this about the other side?
Well, there's generational conflict is not new, as you said. Generational conflict has been around for a long time. But every generation has a set of what I call generational signposts. And these are events that are very specific to a generation, and they influence the way a generation looks and perceives different situations. And so what happens is we have this emotional connection to our generational signposts that another generation has no connection with. And so when we come into a situation, we are putting a high value on our own generational signposts and sometimes disregarding the generational signposts from a different generation. So I like to point out, so for example, a big complaint with the younger generation is that the older generation doesn't want to do anything different. This is the way we've always done it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, but the younger generation is coming on board, and they want to challenge the old ways of doing things. And we have to give them a way to do that. And so I like to point out that, hey, if you have a younger person that comes in and is challenging the way you're doing things, we tend to take it personally. We tend to think, oh, they're challenging us, when really they're just challenging the process. On the flip side, I point out to younger generations, there's often a reason that the older generation is doing something the way they've done it. And it behooves the younger generation to understand the history and the processes and what went into whatever the older generation is holding on to.
So that's very real, right? Those are to sum that up, if you're talking to Gen X and millennials, it is there's a reason why certain things have worked, why the people older than you do the things that they do. And then the other side is, well, there are things that are very different now, right? Student debt is very real. Even if you graduated college 10 years ago, the tuition is now double in 10 years. That doesn't make any sense, right? And then climate change, of course, is a real concern. So things are different to some extent. So one more question for you, which is, do you see this conversation shifting at some point? Is there going to be some sort of coming together on this?
I think we're coming together as it is. But what I really like what the younger generation is doing, this disruptive movement, the OK Boomer. What I really like about it is it's forcing us to talk about it. It is forcing us to talk about it in much larger numbers. And this is important because the changes that the younger generation want to see happen when it comes to climate change, politics, student debt, those changes are not going to occur unless we have a conversation about it. And the fact that the younger generation is really holding the older generation's feet to the fire, as it would be, I think this is significant because it's going to force us to have some important conversations. Just like we saw with the hashtag #MeToo movement, that became a cultural focus because of its online presence, and all of a sudden we started having really important conversations about that topic. And that's what's going to happen with these topics: climate change, politics, student debt. We're going to start talking about it and finding solutions because the younger generation is bringing it to the forefront and really forcing us to take a close look at it.
And you said this a few times, talking about it, right, is what's very different and new to sort of the current generation. So Megan, thank you so much for your insight. It was a great conversation.